back to the podcast, everybody. You're listening to In the Company of Charity podcast. And I'm Sister Liz, and I'm here, as always, with my faithful friend and coworker here, Sister Elizabeth Grime. Hello, dear.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
That's good.
These days, it's getting crisp in the air. As always, a weather report here on the podcast.
That's right. And you know I'm going to say it. It is sweater weather.
It's sweater weather. It's
sweater weather. It's getting beyond sweater weather. Now it's getting to be your parka. November. Yeah.
And we, excuse me, we have some great feast days coming up next week. It's Foundation of the Company, Feast of the Miraculous Medal, Feast of St. Catherine Library, just like a triduum of amazingness coming up.
And in the middle of it is Thanksgiving, which is kind of unique. Thanksgiving must be kind of late or something this year, but Thanksgiving comes right in the midst of the triduum, which is perfect because it gives us opportunity to be so thankful for the company, for the Daughters of Charity around the world, and St. Catherine and the Miraculous Medal, which have been just such support to people throughout all these centuries, you know. So it's amazing, really. That gives us time to give thanks for so much that we've been given.
100%. And we just have an excellent episode for you guys today, an interview with Chuck Levesque, who is a mainstay in Depaul USA, Depaul International, all the great things that are being done on behalf of those in need. And just, I love what you guys deep dive into about identifying needs and then responding to them in a way that is thoughtful, planful, and respectful of people's dignity. So anything you want to highlight so we should listen for in this one?
I think and what we talk about a lot of is the creativity to address the diversity of people who are unhoused or could potentially become unhoused. It's not just about going to someplace like Skid Row and saying, let's put in housing here and scoop all these people up. You know, there is a process and a preparation, and people have to want to go. And in order for all that to happen, there needs to be programs that are willing to be creative, to keep low thresholds. That's one of the DePaul monikers, is that the threshold is low, meaning that even people who might be using at the moment are not excluded, because so many programs are like, get yourself together and then you can get housing, because you can't come if you're using, you can't come if this, and I get it. I understand it. So then that means there needs to be a place for that to happen. And to begin the housing process in early stages is very different. It's very different, and it needs to be creative and diversified. And I think that's the thing to listen for, the number of ways that Depaul USA has addressed the issues of homelessness that they've been presented with around the country, really, over the last 12 years or so. It's been amazing what they've done, really.
And that, I think something that jumps out to me is that people's reasons for ending up without housing are complex and interconnected. And so, like you said, it's not just a matter of, okay, here's an apartment then. They need those other supports and wraparounds and encouragement to be able to start to address the reasons why they are in the situation they are. And I think that's such a dignified way to do it, because it goes back to the question of St. Vincent, what must be done? And he's not only addressing the what, but the how. And you said you were going to share a story, a testimony.
Yeah, a testimony. I went recently, there was a fundraiser in St. Louis for DePaul St. Louis, which does a number of housing programs, some for the mentally ill, others it's low-income housing. And so there was a fundraiser, and often at fundraisers, someone who has been helped by the program or someone who's in the program would get up and speak and talk about the impact it's had on their lives. And some people, there's controversy around whether to do that or not. But I think generally DePaul does it in a very respectful way of just having someone say, "This is what I do. This is how I got here, and this is how it's been helpful." And this young gentleman got up and talked about how DePaul, St. Louis housing programs that he's been in have really helped him connect back with his children and his family. And so after that, everyone clapped and we were excited for him. And I think the staff who were with him and himself were ready to sit down. And his mom, who was there, popped up and took the microphone. Now, unexpected, really was not
Way to go,
planned.
Mom.
Yeah, she took the mic and she said, "I just want to say that yes, my son has reconnected with his family, and so DePaul has made a difference in his life and in the life of his children and his family. But DePaul, in helping my son, you have helped me and my family." Like the extension of how helping an individual really helps a village, right? Helps a whole family. That then she talked about having the burdens of worrying about him lifted from her shoulders, allowed her to do other things she had been holding on to. It was so powerful. And I thought it's in this kind of arena, this place where that for DePaul, that touches the lives of people so personally that and intimately, these are not humongous programs that DePaul runs. They touch people very personally in their lives, and that part for me really came out in this story. That this young man, clearly known by some of the people there, so obviously the staff could see his advances, and everyone was cheering for him. And we forget that when we help an individual, we help everyone that individual has contact with. That it increases his opportunity to be reconnected, and it reconnects others in a very powerful way. So it's just one example of how we forget that kind of story, that we're not just helping individuals with individual problems. We're really helping individuals who are part of a bigger family, who are part of our community, who are part of our state, who are part of our country. And when we help them, everybody gets lifted up, which was a really powerful message for me. I forgot that, I forget those kinds of things. And she just really brought that home. So again, another story of someone who you wouldn't say is being helped by DePaul, but in fact is, because of the work they're doing for this young man. So yeah, check them out. Definitely go online, pull up the website even before maybe the episode starts for you, and scroll through some of the programs you're going to hear about in this episode.
Enjoy the episode, everyone.
Hi, everyone. This is Sister Elizabeth, and you are listening to In the Company of Charity, the podcast of the Daughters of Charity. And I'm here today with Mr. Chuck Levesque, and have to own up to this, that Chuck and I worked together quite a while ago on a project called Daybreak in Macon, Georgia, which some of you, our listeners, have heard about. And he's here today to tell us about the work that he's doing and about Depaul USA. Now, a while back, probably in season 2 or 3, we did an interview with Mark McGreevy, who is the group leader. And so Depaul USA is one of a number of programs that Depaul International has. And so, again, Chuck is the executive director of the work in the United States. And I've asked him to come and speak with us today. Now, he's been the director for about, what did we say?
14 years.
14 years, yeah. So, Chuck, when we talked about you being on the podcast, I asked you one thing. You said, what are we going to talk about? And I said, I'd like to talk about your experience or your view on diverse ways to address the issues of people living without the security of a place to call home. Right? And so you've done a lot of work with DePaul now over the years. Since way back 2011 when we opened Daybreak, it's gone amazing. So jump in now. Tell us about your experiences, what your view of this is after these many years, and tell us about the diversity of the works that DePaul USA is currently engaged in, because it really is quite fascinating, the things that you've done. So.
Well, thank you very much, Sister Elizabeth. This is my first podcast ever, so I'm very excited about this. I love the way you phrased the question about the diverse programs to address the issue of homelessness, because homelessness is a problem or a state that you can arrive at a variety of ways, right? You can arrive there because you're middle class and your house burnt down one night. You're homeless, technically. You can become homeless because you have an addiction issue and you spend all your money feeding that addiction and you lose your home. You can become homeless because your mental health is unstable and causes you to act in certain ways or to have trouble holding your job. You could become homeless because you're a gay kid and kicked out of your parents' home. So there are so many ways to become homeless. I think you need so many ways to get out of homelessness. And so I get frustrated when people think that there's only one way to end homelessness, and that's, quote, permanent supportive housing. I firmly believe in permanent supportive housing, but I think we have to have a diverse array of programs to meet people's needs. And at DePaul, that has really happened organically as we began to tackle the issue of homelessness. So we are fully a Vincentian organization, and we take to heart two things that I think St. Vincent would want us to focus on. And that's being inventive unto infinity, but also trying to meet local needs. And so not trying to impose our programs on the local needs. So now DePaul is in 12 cities and 11 states. We do everything from day centers, which you started down in Macon, and now we have 4, Macon, Little Rock, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and Los Angeles. We have permanent supportive housing, we have transitional housing, we have housing for men who have addiction issues, recovery. We have a recovery house. So we have housing for students who are homeless. So the programs all provide a place, but then they have services that go with them. And those services are really what I think is special about DePaul. So let's talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, Sister, homeless college students, which people find, how is this even possible, right?
Yeah, I think it's one of the most innovative programs that you started. So I'm really excited to hear about the work that you're doing with college students. But I just want to backtrack
Sure.
a little. I think what you said, and you kind of say it because it's so much a part of who you are and what DePaul is, that there is a sense of coming into a community or having a wider view of communities and saying, what's the issue and what's not being done? What is not being done to help this particular group of people who are homeless, who are unhoused, or who are lacking some security? And so I think that's the question. It's kind of like the Vincentian question, right? Which is what needs to be done? And what needs to be done in one place is different than what needs to be done in another.
Well, remember we started in Macon when we came down. You were doing other interfaith work, and you had a group of women who were working together from churches in the synagogue to help women around the world. You had trade fairs.
We were doing human trafficking work, actually. Yeah.
And when we started down this path, we held consultations with the community, and we actually met with churches and faith communities over a year to listen to the problem. And then we also listened to their thoughts about the problem of homelessness in Macon and what might be done to address it. But then we also talked and surveyed people who were on the street. We talked to other providers. And in Macon, we came to the conclusion that what was needed was a day center. So that was that process. And we've used that iterative process in other cities as well. And for college students, that's what happened in Chicago, because we were looking to do a program in Chicago, and they said there's really not enough beds for young people who are homeless in Chicago. We're doing okay for people who are older, but there aren't places for young people. They don't want to come to shelters. They're afraid. They're scared. We need another solution. So we started looking at what we might do for young people, formed a working group, brought in people, and then we heard from DePaul University deans that they were seeing up to 50 students a semester who had no place to live. And I remember talking to this one dean, and she said all of them have these complicated issues, one of whom that just came in recently, she told me, was married and was going through a divorce, and there was violence and she had to leave. Other situations were kids who were kicked out of their houses because they were gay. Other situations, the family didn't have enough money to pay for tuition and housing, and the kid would have to drop out of school. So there were all these things, and she said it was really difficult. But she said, I asked each of the students, or I suggested to each of the students, why don't you take a semester off just to resolve these issues and then come back? And she said, every student said to her, if I leave, I'm not coming back. So I cried when I heard that, because as you know, I cry pretty easily. And when I heard that, I was like, we have to do something about this. And so we started a program at DePaul, and we named it after the town where St. Vincent lived as a student, Dax, France, and that was a daughter of Cherry suggested that name to us. So we took the Dax name, and we started pairing students with faculty who had extra bedrooms, staff members at DePaul who had extra bedrooms, and it worked. But it was difficult to find the families, and the students often felt they were imposing on the families. And so finally, we had a donor who had an apartment building in Chicago, and he gave us the use of his garden apartment. For those of you not from Chicago, those are the half underground apartments where you can only see people's ankles as they walk by from the window. But it was a nice neighborhood, and we put the student in that apartment who had been living on the train and sleeping in the library, and he blossomed and did well. And sort of a light went off in our head that we needed to find independent spaces for these students. So we started renting a rectory in Pilsen and put students from DePaul there. And then it's grown now where we have DAX programs in 3 houses in Chicago. We now pair up with City Colleges of Chicago and DePaul University. We have a DAX house at St. John's Vincent University in Queens in New York. We have a DAX house in Philadelphia that serves students from a variety of Philly universities. And then a DAX house in LA that serves trade tech students, that's their community college, and USC students. So that was sort of a unique program. And what we do there with all these programs is that there's a case manager, and the whole goal is to get the student to graduate. Because if they graduate, our belief is they'll connect to the world of work and won't have another economically driven episode of homelessness. And we have had great success. We've 98% of the students last year stayed in the program or graduated.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Or exited to other permanent housing. So that's one program. And again, we'll provide money for food if they need food. We provide access to transportation. We link kids up with counseling if that's what they need. But the whole idea is to wrap around the services and sort of just be an enlightened landlord. They don't pay rent per se. They pay a small program fee, like $100 a month for their apartment or their room. And we think that we're filling a real need, because there are estimates about 60,000 college students will be homeless in any given year in the U.S.
Wow, I think nobody would guess that, really.
Yeah.
So I think this is a perfect example of the Vincentian question, what must be done? And somebody comes with the issue, right? This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm experiencing among my students or within my neighborhood, or this is what I see in the homeless that I'm working with. They don't have this service, and so it's very difficult. I remember when we were in Macon, we would ask the question, what do you do that you don't want to do? What do you do because it's not being done, but it's not in your wheelhouse to do it? Or to ask those who were going to shelters and eating at meal programs, if there was one thing that you need every day that you don't have, what is it? And those kind of questions are really helpful, I think, because the uniqueness of homelessness, the uniqueness of poverty has really to do with the lack of resources in a particular area that we don't always know about. We assume, as you were saying, we assume permanent supported housing is going to help everyone's problem, but everyone's problem isn't support or housing or the combination of those things. It might be something else. So that's what I've always loved about DePaul International in general, but DePaul USA specifically, because I think the other thing you could talk a little bit about is that you gain support, you do your own fundraising, of course, and you have support from churches and religious communities and the typical places. You get some government funding, but none of it is sufficient to take care of all the problems. So can you talk a little bit about that combination of how do you support the mission because it's innovative and a little different, and be able to access funding so that the burden is not placed on the person who's just trying to really pull themselves up, and the support that you're giving is good. But as you said, these young people leaving college, the support that you give them is so that they won't experience another episode like this.
Right. And they'll break the bonds of poverty.
Yeah.
Most of these kids are first generation college students. Most of them are BIPOC. Most of them are very low income. So it's, I think, a real systemic change. But to answer the question that you just posed, when we first started, we would start programs without having all the funding. And that would drive certain board members of mine absolutely crazy. But if we waited for all the money, we wouldn't have done 2/3 of what we've done. So we would start a program like Daybreak, which up until this year had received no government money, really. We got one, I think, CDBG grant once, and that was a difficult enough experience to put us off seeking that kind of money again. But that money is always raised in the community from individuals and foundations, and then also from the daughters in St. Louis. But we had to start that way because we weren't known. We just recently did that in Mississippi, where we started a program for women leaving prison. There is no statutory or governmental money available right now in Mississippi for that. We're trying to change that, but we went in there with foundation grants and started a program for women, providing them with housing and making sure they got employment within 30 days and got their benefits. And we had 4 women start. 2 have already graduated and moved back home within a year. And we'll be able to serve 9 women this year. But we don't have all the money we need for that. We have to go out and fundraise for those programs. But as we mature, we started getting asked to do things, which didn't happen before. So the city of Nashville, booming city, but also booming with problems as like homelessness as well. And they recently built their first city permanent supportive housing facility, 90 beautiful units right on the edge of downtown, but they couldn't find anyone to run it. None of the local providers wanted to run it. So they came and they heard about us from people we work with in Arkansas and asked us to bid, and we received the contract. And that contract is almost completely funded, paying for all the case management and all the services. That's 13 years after we started, right? So there's some kind of institutional maturity going on, and now that's it's possible to get grants like that or contracts like that. Not everything will be that way, but we've really grown, and that's added stability. So at the end of the day, next year will be $11 million organization, 180 employees around the country, full and part-time. 60% of our income will come from the government, cities, states, or the feds, that the other 40% we have to raise. And that breaks down to like 20% will be foundations, and then the other remaining 20% will be individuals and events. And so we never have all the money we need to do what we're doing today, much less what we dream of doing tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think it's important for people to hear that, because as you said, permanent supported housing is like considered the best practice. And what we know is the best practice is what the government says it is and will support. And so I know, back in the day, safe shelters, right? Safe havens was it. Just open a building, let people come in. Nobody liked it. It really wasn't safe. So the government stopped funding that. The government used to fund day centers, and then they didn't think that was doing, so they stopped doing that. So with that in mind, I think that's why for me, the creativity and the openness, I think that's the other that is kind of characteristic, I think, of Depaul USA and maybe the Depaul International in general, is that there's an openness and a courage in some ways to address the issues nobody else wants to address. And so in that way, the ability to help people who will not get out, and they will eventually be needing the government services, but if we can catch somebody sooner, it helps to increase their dignity, it helps to increase the likelihood that they won't have another episode, or experience this particular kind of homelessness again. And the diversity of funding as well. It engages then the whole community, which I also think is really important, that a community sees that what they're contributing comes not just from their own pockets, but from their church and from their city council and from the government, because it takes the whole village to do this, And so I just appreciate, because talking about money is not always easy. Mm-hmm. And I think when we talk about these issues, we always like, wow, you do this and you do this. And we don't have any idea. It's kind of like the poor serving the poor sometimes. Mm-hmm. Many programs don't have enough. And so I wanted to put, because I know that this is an area of great concern. And so, of course, our listeners will be encouraged, if they so choose, to donate to Depaul USA for the works that they're doing. But also, I just think to be able to highlight that as also a diversity, a way in which the ministries themselves create that diversity. Talk a little bit about, in that sense, of what might be a couple of stories that for you, I'll say this because he does cry pretty easily, that have brought you to tears over the years. And you don't have to be real specific, but just what, in this work as the executive director, knowing you, I know you're not separate from the work. You're very intimately connected with each of the programs. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So I just want to go back to and say that the day centers, like you said, are not considered fundable by the federal government, but our day centers make so many things possible. We just opened 16 units of housing in Macon and a medical respite. That never would have happened if we hadn't started with a day center where people could see the work that Depaul does and the difference it made, and it gave us credibility to be able to partner with the Housing Authority to be able to raise $2.3 million from Maconites to build the medical respite and to pay for the apartments. So day centers, I think, are amazing when they're well run, and I think we run 4 very good day centers, and they make such a difference for the people coming in and receiving the care and having a safe place and having relationships. And that's something I had to learn, because I was all about, I'm trained as a lawyer, let's think linear, let's get these people housed and into jobs, and it's not going to happen for everybody, right? They need a safe place. But going back to your other point about stories, I'll just tell you 2 stories I heard this week. I was at a gala in Philadelphia, and we had some program participants speak, and one was a DAC student, and one was in the recovery house. And you would have loved the man in the recovery house. He was just the nicest man, Roger. He gave his name at the event so I can share it. But his drug of choice was alcohol. And he just told us all that he got to the point where he started having heart issues as well as having his alcohol issues. And he thought, I'm going to die this way. I don't want to die this way. He had 2 heart attacks, and he came to us at DePaul House and started in the program, and he said that he was so broken that he wouldn't leave his room. He would just stay in his room all day because he didn't want people to see him. But one day he poked his head out, and we have a great director in Philadelphia. Here's where I start crying. Brendan, who's just a loud New Yorker. He's got the accent. He's got the booming voice. He's about 6 feet tall. And he would just say, "Hey, Roger," and smile. And that's all Roger needed to sort of take the next step. And then he got a case manager, and she worked with him, and he left us. He got to the point where he was able to get benefits, disability, and rent his own apartment. and he recovered from his 2 heart attacks. He's like, I physically recovered, I recovered emotionally, I recovered spiritually, and he can't thank his case manager or Brendan enough for their support. And just watching him on the stage, smiling at Brendan and Brendan smiling back at him, it was magical. And that's what makes you want to continue with the work, because he was ready to die and just had given up. And so
you're right. I would love to have met him.
and just lovely.
Yeah.
And then we had a student who father left Mexico because they had no money, and came and was working in Michigan, and she always dreamed of education. And she decided one day that she would go up to visit her father for the summer and get across the border. And I know this is getting into a political issue that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, but let's just divorce it from the larger political issue and talk about her as a person. And she said that when she got in the car to wave goodbye to her mother, she knew she wasn't coming back, because this was the chance to get an education. So she came to Michigan and always wanted to be an artist. And everyone told her, you can't live if you're an artist, you can't make a living. And so she became very depressed in high school. And they told her, go to the community college and get a practical, technical degree and do something. But she kept her ambition to become an artist, and she heard from people that there was a program that she could go to at the community colleges of Philadelphia. So she came to Philadelphia, and she had no place to live. I mean, she could pay for the tuition, but she couldn't afford to live anywhere. So she came to our DAX program in Philadelphia and was living with us. And then she decided she would transition to the University of the Arts and pursue her graphic design degree. Well, she got in there, and then that university closed, and she was faced with losing everything. But our team at the Dax House got her into Drexel University on a scholarship, and that was her dream school. And now she's about to get her Bachelor's of Arts and will be a graphic designer. And she she's first in her family to ever go to college. She's so thankful for her parents for supporting her dream. And she came here not knowing English. She speaks English fluently. She's getting her bachelor's. She's going to have a job. She's going to be a productive member of society. And she was so excited. And so thankful that she found the DAX program. So those are just 2 stories I heard this week.
Yeah, it is beautiful. And I know it's hard sometimes. It's not always an easy question to say, tell us a couple of stories. Because 1, there's so many. And 2, they're complex. There's a lot of complex issues too. And the stories can sound, well, this happened and now everybody's fine.
And not everybody is fine.
Right.
And there are people who don't succeed, and we know that. And sometimes you feel a little, as I get older or do this more and more, I feel a little exploitative. Like, tell us how great DePaul is, because so someone told me that, maybe the way to do that better is to have people start with where they are now, rather than say everything they went through. Do it backwards, and say, hey, this is what I'm doing today, but it wasn't always this way. But so I do struggle with that, but I love hearing the stories, because it motivates you to do more, and it's just great to share in other people's success.
Yeah. And I think even that, to say, while we want to hear how someone's doing, not so that we can hear how great we are, but how great they are. And so how do we do that without exploiting it's also those kind of innovative, sensitive, human ways. And again, I just, my experience with DePaul was at Daybreak and Jericho Way, and those were tough beginnings, because day centers weren't the thing. And sometimes it took a little convincing that this was going to work. But I also think that those were the beginnings of the times when somebody would hear about what was happening at one place, and seeing and hearing about the successes of the people who were there, not necessarily the program itself, but what was actually happening to people. I think when we talked about Macon, Georgia, well, we didn't necessarily have the statistics. We knew that panhandling almost disappeared, not because we kept track of it, but because we heard from the community since you guys opened, because they don't need to panhandle for things anymore because they have access to what they need, makes a huge difference. And I think that's, for me, what DePaul has always been, is that place that meets the need of the individual, but in doing that, they also meet the needs of a community. And what does the community need for this particular person who is a member of their city, who is a neighbor in whatever way that is? What does the community need to do, and how can they help to this person so that they can become a productive citizen, somebody who can now live in the community and be a part of the life of the community? And I think that's so important. It's important, I think, for the general public to see that homelessness isn't something that should be dealt with not in my backyard, right? Mm-hmm. But in fact, in my backyard. It should be done in my community, in my neighborhood, so I can be a part of it. I can see the success of it. I can cheer on the folks who are there and see the progress that someone can make, because it's so uplifting. So I appreciate those two stories. They were really, really very uplifting, and they're the stories that were told, but they're representative of a much larger group of people who you could have told that story about a number of the DOCS students or some who were in the rehab programs,
And I think convincing the community that this is important and it's successful requires us also not just to tell the stories, but to keep statistics. And going back to Vincent's admonition to do good well, we really put an emphasis on tracking what we do. So we have outputs, like we know exactly how many showers we provide and how many meals we provide, and it's thousands and thousands. And then how many people move into housing, how many people improve their housing. Maybe they don't get permanent, but they move from the street to transitional housing. So we really put an emphasis on keeping those statistics as well. Somebody said that stories are statistics with soul. I like that kind of
note.
I like that. So we tell the stories, but we also keep the larger stats. That's not to say that we've solved homelessness in any of the communities we're in. We've helped, I think, a lot of people. There's still a lot more to be done in all of the communities that we're in to end homelessness. But I think your point about getting the community involved is the key, because we're still very small. But when you see what happens in Macon, when all these volunteers come in, all these other organizations come in, they're invested in the success. They want it to succeed. And I remember when we opened the new apartments in Macon, there were ladies in the apartments who were like, I'm so excited that someone from Daybreak gets to live here. And I was like, how great is that these people are excited that they have helped create housing for somebody who is in the day center next door.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think, as you were saying, so the universities, are able to highlight that they have students and then be able to maybe help provide rooms. You said that there were some professors or staff who were able to provide a room, and then that wasn't enough, or it wasn't exactly. And so then you're looking for other housing, and there's rectories, or there's probably convents as well.
Convents are perfect.
I know. Having lived in them, I know they're perfect for that kind of housing. So, I think that those are the important things, I think, to hear, is that it's a way of using the resources, not abusing the resources of a community, right? Calling on the community to be as creative as you're trying to be, and say these are the places that you have that could be helpful, and then be able to make them beautiful, as much as possible. Talk a little bit about, and this will probably be the last part we'll be able to talk about, but I think it's important in the whole scheme of what we've talked about. So Depaul USA has these different, very diverse programs throughout the country. Again, not solving, you're not going to clean up Skid Row or any, although I know you'd like to, but you can do your part. But you're also connected to the larger international, DePaul International, and 13 House Projects, which is a Vincentian project. So talk a little bit about the combination of say the day centers specifically, but any other place that also resulted in creating housing, building houses in communities to use up abandoned properties, which is another really important thing, I think. There's so much blight in some areas that the building of apartments or small units can make a huge difference in a community. So they see not just that you're going to do this and then dump those people out, but that you're moving it forward. So talk a little bit about that development of housing that you've also been involved in.
So the antidote to homelessness is housing, just by definition. And I remember, I think you were still at Jericho Way, which is our day center in Little Rock, Arkansas, which is in the southern part of the city of Little Rock, not far from the airport. And I remember having visited, I went back to the airport and I was flying back to Chicago, and my plane took off and we flew right over Jericho Way. And I looked down and I could see that it was really a circumscribed neighborhood. There were the railroad tracks on the south, a major street to the east, and then a floodplain to the west, and then another commercial street to the north. And it was a tiny little neighborhood, and there were lots of empty lots. And so it's like, wow, well, maybe we can go from Jericho Way out into the community and build housing. And so I talked to the mayor about the idea, and we then started to talk to the land bank about getting the lots, which was incredibly time-consuming and difficult, and lots of lien issues and chain of custody issues that were difficult to resolve. But in the end, we raised $500,000 from the community, and we built 5 duplexes, around 3 in that neighborhood and then 2 in other inner city neighborhoods that were single-story, 2-unit houses. And they're beautiful. They're modern. We hired a local architect, so the money stayed in town. And then we built these houses, and then we've also restored 2 houses in Little Rock as part of the 13 Houses campaign. So that sort of all came out of the day center, because we were there and we realized there's no affordable, decent housing to put people in. Once you find them, you get them an income stream and you want to place them somewhere, the places where you could go were terrible and expensive. So now these houses are 30% of your income. So you're making $700 a month, you're paying $210 for a beautiful brand new house that were built by these wonderful Christian builder who would, I don't know if you remember him, but he would hug his house before he left every day and pray that nothing bad would happen to the house. So yeah, we've done housing in Little Rock. Now we have houses that we've been given in Macon, 4 houses that we've been given, including a house that the daughters lived in that we have 3 gentlemen living in. And then we've got 16 apartments now downtown that are brand new, that are really beautiful, sister. We've done the housing there. We have some affordable housing in Philly now. So but that's not possible. For example, like your innovation and diversity, we can't do that in LA. You cannot build a house for $100,000 in LA. So there we're going to have to find other ways of getting into the housing market. But in Kansas, for example, in Leavenworth, we'll have 20 houses. We're able to buy these little empty houses in an inner city neighborhood, and then we're rehabbing them and moving people in. So again, our strategy depends, as you said, on the city and what the environment in that city.
Yeah.
In a city like Chicago, we have so many surplus religious buildings, so convents, and we're not getting great deals when we rent them from the authorities, but they are there and they're perfect. So it's always like figuring out. I discovered in this business that real estate determines the design of the program. It should be the other way around, but it's the real estate that you're given or that you can have that will determine what kind of programming you do.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's really interesting, and especially when we were talking about the fundraising. You had said, you often have to start with no money or very little money. And I know in Daybreak we didn't even have the building ready. The contractor was working around us and saying, "Since you really need to leave the building so we can build it." I thought, you can build it around us, but the construction, the renovation, the building of, it's such a sign to a community, I think, of the life that can be brought into a community when we address the issues of people who are feeling ostracized, feeling on their fringes, feeling vulnerable, to do what we can to support them and then bring them into the community. And as you said, probably not going to happen in LA the way it happened in others, but I trust that DePaul, if there is a way, DePaul USA will find it,
It might be the Nashville model where the city runs a program and says, come run it, but yeah.
Yeah, whatever it's going to be, I think it seems to be the natural conclusion to move in that direction. And so we started with this idea that permanent supported housing is the government's idea of best practice, but there are so many steps that need to happen before. Not everyone is ready to go into housing.
We also need just affordable housing.
Exactly.
There are some people who don't need the supports, but just need an affordable place.
Yeah, and so small things happen to make the big thing happen. As I saw an aerial view of Macon, of the area around Daybreak, and Daybreak we thought was great, and as soon as we opened it, we knew it was too small, but we functioned in there, serving 150 people a day sometimes. And when I saw an aerial view of the new housing and the respite center, I said, this looks like the tool shed, but I realized that's exactly what it should be. Like this small beginning that can really birth such a bigger project. I was thinking about Jericho Way. I mean, again, those are my two experiences with Depaul USA, but thinking about the churches that came forward in that group of CrossFit women who decided that they were at the Holy Souls Parish and started the group Settled Souls, and they got furniture, and amazing. I mean, these women were amazing. They liked carrying the mattresses up the stairs. It was crazy, but again, that was something that came from them. Yeah. It wasn't like, this great innovative thing, let's ask some people in the church to do it. They were looking and saying, where's the need? What happens when you get somebody a house in public housing, right? Well, we have to find furniture. They're like, we got this, we got it. And they were amazing. And so people moved into a fully furnished apartment.
Beautifully furnished,
appropriately furnished. Yeah. And it then gave that person an opportunity that was one less obstacle that was going to keep that place looking empty and scary and uninviting, that they didn't want to go in it. This was a place they could invite their friends and then have someone be able to talk to them about all of that.
So if I can tell two quick stories about the having a nice place to live. This is a sad, funny, typical story. So we open in Nashville, and it's 90 units of permanent supportive housing, and these are people who are chronically homeless, which, as you know, means 4 episodes of homelessness within 3 years, or a year consecutive on the streets with a disability, usually a mental health issue. So we have 2 gentlemen. One goes next door to visit the other and says, do you want to go for a smoke? And the other guy says, no, I don't want to smoke. So the other gentleman picks up a knife and stabs him 5 times in the face and in the back, and then steals his PlayStation. He is arrested, this gentleman, and has to leave our program, unfortunately. And then the poor guy who was stabbed is going to be fine. He goes to Vanderbilt Hospital, and he prays for the person who attacked him.
Oh.
But he also falls in love with his nurse and says, why don't you come live with me? I got a sweet new apartment. So he loves his place. That's what I took from that. I love the fact that he's praying for his attacker. But then he loves his place so much that he invites this new love of his life to come live with him in his sweet little apartment.
It's so sweet because, there's something he has to offer.
Exactly. He felt like he was all that.
Yeah, and he has something to love, someplace to feel his dignity, even if he was victimized in it, right? I mean, he can see,
and he's doing.
This is my safe space,
and he is doing well. So
that's great.
I can tell
that's
that
great.
story. But
yeah.
But your point about things starting from a small, all in the small. Have you heard that logo?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all in the small. So in New Orleans, you know the genesis story for New Orleans. We were down there and we asked, what can we do to help? And the people who were working in the homelessness sector, and particularly in the Catholic area, were saying we need transportation to take people to the St. Vincent de Paul pharmacy from the day center that already existed, the Rebuild Center, which is on the grounds of a beautiful Vincentian parish, St. Joseph's Church in New Orleans. So Sister Kathleen we got her a van, and she literally started driving the guys and they were mostly guys, from the Rebuild Center to the other side of the river to go to the pharmacy and get their meds. And she became such a confidant of these guys that they were saying, what we really need, sister, is housing. And we were then invited to bid on a contract to create a scattered site housing program in collaboration with the Harry Thompson Center. And today we have 70 units of scattered site housing around New Orleans because we started driving people around. Yeah. And a daughter of charity, I have to get into
of course.
A daughter of charity was so good in establishing relationships with these people that they confided in her, and it reflected so well on DePaul that we were invited to do this work. So yeah, I'm not a guy who frets about scale, and that's the magic word for a lot of social service agencies, and impact. I mean, we've always had impact, but we got to take this to scale. Sometimes you just start small and don't tread on the heel of Providence, and
go
and see where it leads you. So
yeah, spoken like a true Vincentian, and I think that's the point. I think we could kind of end with that. All this to say that in the 1600s, a French priest and Louise de Marillac, his partner at the time, starting the Daughters of Charity and the Vincentian priests and the Ladies of Charity. Those were not big things, and they were incredibly innovative. To start a program of women who were going to be out serving outside the cloister was outrageous at the time, and a small group of women became a huge community. But it also opened the opportunity for women who could not get into a cloister because they weren't educated, they weren't wealthy, they weren't who was supposed to go into cloisters. It opened up for village girls who could have also had a vocation. God calls everyone. And so this is even a vocation, even for your volunteers. And I think that's part of that innovation, that part of that creative energy and the diversity that God calls, and to have those places where someone can serve, I think is really very, very Vincentian, in that sense that not just the question of what should be done, but who should be doing it. Right? Who are the players here? And it's not always going to be the professionals, right? It's going to be the lady down the street, the few ladies at the church that want to get involved, a couple of guys who are recently retired, or a business that wants to do some good in their community. It's going to come from a lot of places, and each person can do what they can do, and no one is asked to do all of it. I think that's kind of the Vincentian way as well. Everyone does their part so that it lifts up not just the individual person who's suffering and struggling, but the whole community who is suffering and struggling because its members are, right? That's it. And that's what I think Depaul USA and Depaul International overall, and the 13 house projects. We've talked about that. We should probably need to do a podcast episode on that as well. But
happy to come back to this beautiful studio in St. Louis and talk about 13 houses.
Yeah, they know. We've had conversations. Our listeners have heard the genesis of even just our mic systems. So we're pretty budget. We like it that way. Because we can put all our energy into our work. So thank you. Thanks so much. And we talked about a lot of things today, and I think our listeners just need to go check out Depaul USA online. And if you can, there'll be a way to donate from the website. And if you live in a city, check out the cities in the states where they are. I would give them a call and see how you might be able to help, not just financially, that's very important, but also maybe for Advent's coming up, maybe you want to think about Lent, to put your foot in and say, how can I help? What must be done? And how can I help do it? So thank you so much for being here.
It was such fun to talk to you, to reminisce and to talk about how things developed and started. And thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, great. So thanks so much.
You're welcome.